Halfway across the world from us is a far-off land, a land that has a noble history, unique culture, and troubled present. This land is Kenya. In 1887, a British private business leased a part of Kenya from the Sultan of Zanzibar. This private business received a charter from the British government as the Imperial British East Africa Company a year later, but lacked the necessary funds to develop. As a result, the British government directly took over in 1895 and Kenya became known as British East Africa.
European settlement started in large farms formed in the fertile highlands, which displaced the native Kikuyu. The Africans had no voice in government as the British officially ruled Kenya. In the 1940s, Kenyans, mainly the Kikuyu, began opposing British rule. They formed the Kenyan African Union in 1944, headed by Jomo Kenyatta in 1947. A subset of this party, called the Land and Freedom Army, formed that sought unity and measures to improve the lives of Africans. This was also known as the Mau Mau Rebellion. Kenyatta was wrongfully convicted of leading the uprising and was jailed in a remote corner.
When the fighting ended in 1956, 13,000 people had been killed. Though the uprising was defeated, negotiations were forced, which led to Kenyan independence. On December 12, 1963, Kenya gained independence from the United Kingdom and formed a constitutional monarchy. Kenyatta became the country's prime minister, later retitled president when Kenya became a republic in 1964.
Kenya has overcome many obstacles but is still plagued with various issues. Although Africa is a beautiful land filled with picturesque sights and wildlife, areas in sub-Saharan region suffer from many environmental issues. With only 8% of Kenya's land capable of being cultivated for crops and 75% of the Kenyan workforce engaged in agriculture,
Kenyan farmers such as Haji work endless days cultivating depleted soil. Not only does overtaxed soil hinder the progression of Kenyans, but deforestation, water pollution, desertification, and the rampant use of pesticides are a constant threat to the Kenyan environment.
In 2006, Kenya suffered its most severe drought in its independent history, leaving 3.5 million people with barely enough food to survive. Also, human-wildlife conflicts have been increasing as most of Kenya's traditional nomadic tribes are settling into permanent plots of land and taking up farming.
The conservation of wildlife is integral to the ecosystem, as well as Kenyan's famous tourism industry. As we see all of these harsh side effects from the Kenyan ecosystem, we know that Kenya is a rich land that is capable of rebuilding itself with the proper help from humans.
There are also underlying social issues that are the cause of much distress in Kenya. Recent elections in Kenya have been full of strife. Raila Odinga lost Mwai Kibaki. Violence is breaking out as the polls are accused of being rigged. 1,000 people have died and hundreds of thousands more have been displaced. The division of Uhuru Kenyatta, son of the first president Jomo Kenyatta, and William Ruto on opposite sides of the campaign only further split the people.
6 years later, everyone expects the 2013 elections to lead to more violence. This time, Uhuru Kenyatta has William Ruto as his running mate, but both are accused by the International Criminal Courts of crimes against humanity. The ICC charges them with instigating the violence of earlier elections.
Kenyatta and Ruto assumed the role of martyrs, claiming that this is an attempt of the overbearing West to retain influence. This tactic proved to be successful. The elections on March 3rd of this year saw much less violence and Kenyatta won.
Kenya is filled with unique culture and irreplaceable tradition. From the Kikuyu to the Maasai, each people has a distinct way of living and local knowledge. This knowledge, however, is being lost, and once it's gone, it has disappeared from the world forever.
Many times, the local community doesn't see the importance of the knowledge it contains and considers indigenous customs a hindrance to modernity and economic wealth. As elders age and their memory deteriorates, time is running out to save this ancestral knowledge. It is therefore essential to encourage local communities to attempt to preserve knowledge that may be lost while still improving the quality of life with modern developments, and there is a way to preserve native knowledge and embrace the benefits of modernity as well.
At one point, all knowledge was passed on through oral tradition, but now children learn through books and computers. More and more of kids can't speak the language of their elders, which presents further difficulties. It is not just traditional knowledge that is being lost, but a sense of identity and a pride in your culture.
Kenya has a very active agricultural economy, but poor government policies and weak public administration continue to suppress economic freedom and entrepreneurial activity. In particular, the rule of law remains weak, corruption is widespread, and the judiciary is subject to political influence. Efforts to improve regulatory efficiency and open markets continue, but at a slow pace and with little discernible impact.
The Kenyan government's failure to make commitments related to governance led to stop-start relationships with the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, both of which suspended support in 1997 and again in 2001.
Faced with economic hardship and soaring costs for food and hydro, parents are forced to withdraw their children from school, especially girls. Many families cannot afford the school uniform. Rising prices for fuel, food, and electricity create an even harder existence for the Kenyan people. With secondary school education consuming nearly one-half of an average Kenyan household's spending annually, it is little wonder that children from poor families do not attend school.
He's off to school with my friend from over the hill. The walk will take us about half an hour, and we have to watch out for wild animals like elephants. Elephants are dangerous as there is nowhere to hide. You go up a tree and they'll pull you down. You go in a hole and they'll dig you out. My sister's morning job is to fetch firewood. She doesn't go to school as my father cannot afford the school fees. For fathers, it's more important for boys to go to school than girls. At school, we start assembly by singing the national anthem. This is a Catholic school, and I've been given another name here, Emmanuel, which I like the best. At school, we learn English and Swahili, the national language of Kenya. I like English the most because it is the international language of tourists. I want everybody to get an education because it's an important thing. It means people can get good jobs in the future. Everybody should have this chance.
Widespread disease and not enough resources plague Kenya today. Compared to 20 years ago, people live for 10 years less on average. More children die in infancy, and a greater proportion of those who do survive face stunting. Typhoid, malaria, tuberculosis, malnutrition, HIV, and AIDS are just a few prevalent factors.
Specifically, 1.2 million of people in Kenya are currently infected with HIV, and there are not nearly enough health professionals to deal with the high rates of disease or enough medicine available. Some health facilities are staffed with a single nurse, says Anne Rono, Director of Human Resources of the country's Ministry of Health.
Poor working conditions, low salaries, and lack of educated workers all contribute to these conditions. Even if there were suddenly enough workers to adequately staff hospitals, they would need to acquire more medicine to be able to treat effectively. Essential medicines are available at about 65% of Kenya's hospitals. The number is even lower in local clinics.
Even if enough medicine were to appear in the cabinets of the hospital, there is still yet another hurdle. Most Kenyans cannot afford the medicine they require, and only 5.6% of the national budget cost goes to health. This means the brunt of the cost, made even more expensive by high demand and low supply, settles on the shoulders of impoverished families.
Now, various agencies and actions like the Emergency Hiring Plan, the Capacity Project, and AMREF are working to alleviate the effects of poor healthcare, but there is still much work to be done. By 2015, over 10 million deaths per year could be avoided by scaling up health interventions, which largely depend on providing essential medicines.
Yes, Kenya has its share of needs to face.
Yes, they are quite formidable. But with the help of various agencies like AMREF and the Emergency Humanitarian Response Plan supported by the public,
This cultured country will be able to overcome the obstacles and flourish.
If you want to do your part and help somehow,
Visit these online sources to learn more.